So we're just glossing over lieutenants then? And all of the other specialized officers? Techmarine, apothecary? That was one comment. 4 separate people, each named a different rank, the 7-level framework skipped entirely. Today we cover every single one. The pipeline you already know: Aspirant, Neophyte, Scout, Battle Brother, Veteran, Captain, Chapter Master. The Codex Astartes, the governing document Roboute Guilliman wrote after the Horus Heresy to reorganize every Space Marine chapter, places 4 of the most important specialist bodies explicitly outside that structure, not above it, not within it. The actual language from the Codex is existing outside the company-level organization. The Chaplaincy, the Librarium, the Apothecarion, and the Armoury are parallel systems. They don't interrupt the pipeline. They run alongside it, intersecting at every level, shaping every warrior in it, and operating according to their own internal logic. That's the frame. Here's the cost metric that runs underneath everything in this video. Every Space Marine receives 19 sequential gene seed organ implants. The black carapace, the neural interface that allows a warrior to bond with his power armor and feel it as an extension of his own body, is the 19th and final one. From the first implant to the last, the process takes years. Recruits fail at every stage. The organs can fuse incorrectly, grow out of control, trigger death, or produce something worse than death. The chapters accept only the fraction who survive the sequence intact, and then survive the scout company's proving period. The warrior who walks out of that process is already one of the most expensive things the Imperium produces. Every chapter is also required to send 5% of its genetic material to the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars for monitoring, the gene seed tithe that lets the Imperium track genetic drift and authorize new chapter foundings. The biology isn't just a biological resource. It's also a political one. Every specialist in this video paid that price. Then they paid more. The Chaplain. At company level, a chaplain ranks second only to the captain. Every company in a Codex-compliant chapter has one, as standard to company composition as an apothecary or a standard-bearer. Below the full chaplain rank sits the Justiciar, a training grade listed in the Codex Astartes as the pre-chaplain position. Executioner designates who operate under the chapter master's authority while proving the discipline required for full induction into the chaplaincy. Above company level, 2 further ranks operate. The Reclusiarch oversees the Reclusium, the holiest section of the fortress monastery, housing the chapter's sacred relics, sometimes including the body of its primarch. The Reclusiarch also supervises the training of new chaplains. Above him sits the Master of Sanctity, also titled High Chaplain in some chapters, who is one of the masters of the chapter, equivalent in standing to the Chief Librarian and the Master of the Apothecarion, answering directly to the chapter master. Different chapters name this role differently. The Ultramarines call theirs Master of Sanctity, currently held by Orton Cassius. The White Scars call theirs the Voice of the Storm. The Iron Hands, Iron Father. The Space Wolves, Wolf High Priest, currently Ulrich. The Salamanders, Lord Chaplain. The Word-Bearers, historically, First Chaplain. The Council of Nicaea was convened by the Emperor in 001 M31 in the midst of the Great Crusade to settle the question of whether psychic powers in the Space Marine legions constituted a benefit or an existential threat. The Council's edict banned librarians from using psychic powers and ordered the dissolution of every legion's Librarius Corps, the role as it exists in the 41st millennium. A chaplain is present in a warrior's life from the moment he is selected as a neophyte, presiding over the indoctrination that runs parallel to the physical transformation. He delivers litanies of hate before combat, chants engineered to drive battle brothers to maximum ferocity at the critical moment. He maintains the reclusium and leads the chapter ceremonies that bind the brotherhood together between campaigns. He tests the loyalty and purity of Space Marines throughout their service, not their combat effectiveness, their ideological soundness. There is a difference, and the chaplaincy exists because the Imperium has determined that a warrior who fights brilliantly while secretly questioning the Emperor's divinity is more dangerous than one who fights adequately with absolute conviction. On the battle barges of a chapter's fleet, huge cathedrals occupy the heart of each ship, allowing Space Marines to pray during the months or years a campaign keeps them away from their fortress monastery. The chaplain leads those prayers. He is always present. The bond between a Marine and his chaplain begins at Neophyte induction and does not formally end. The Crozius Arcanum is the weapon and badge of office simultaneously. Its name translates from High Gothic as Arcane Cross. Physically, it's a power maul, a staff topped with the Imperial Aquila or a winged skull, with an energy field incorporated into the shaft that disrupts matter the way a power weapon does, and it's used equally in ceremony and in killing. A few chapters customize the form. Orton Cassius of the Ultramarines fashioned his Crozius after a Tyrannid head as a personal memorial to the Battle of Macragge and the cost Hive Fleet behemoth extracted from the Ultramarines' homeworld. Salamander's chaplains tend toward a smith's hammer or dragon's head design. One chaplain of the Imperial Fists carries a version called the Storm Rod, documented as capable of projecting its power field outward to strike enemies at range rather than requiring contact. The design varies. The duality of purpose does not. The Crozius presents no philosophical problem to the chaplain who carries it, because to him, battle itself is the most glorious form of worship. Weapon and religious symbol are the same object because the act they represent is the same act. The Rosarius is stranger than it appears. It looks like a religious amulet, a gorget, signet ring, or pendant of adamantium shaped into the Imperial Aquila, worn around the neck or on a cord of prayer beads. Inside is a conversion field emitter. When a weapon strikes the Rosarius, the field converts the kinetic energy directly into visible light photons, a blinding flash that neutralizes the impact rather than absorbing it. The field can stop plasma gun shots. Every chaplain receives a Rosarius upon attaining rank, presented formally as a symbol of the link between the chaplaincy and the ecclesiarchy. Sacred texts call it the soul's armor. The description is accurate. A chaplain wears his faith as armor, and the armor works against plasma. A chaplain's additional cost above the standard Astartes transformation isn't technical knowledge or exotic gear. It's verified, continuously monitored trustworthiness. The chaplaincy manages ideological screening that begins at Neophyte induction and never formally ends, because the chapter's spiritual health has to be maintained by someone whose own spiritual health is beyond question, which means that person must be continuously evaluated too. A standard battle brother who proves himself in combat has demonstrated that he can fight and survive. A chaplain has demonstrated, and keeps demonstrating, that he can be trusted with the soul of the Brotherhood. The Imperium, correctly, treats this as both rarer and more expensive than combat skill. The structural paradox at the center of the role. The chaplain's job is to make warriors want to fight and want to die for the Emperor. He is good at this job. When a warrior wants to die too much, when that hunger has consumed his reason and his brotherhood, the chaplain doesn't stop the process. He directs it. The Blood Angels provide the sharpest example. Their death company is composed of brothers who have succumbed to the Black Rage, a genetic flaw that causes them to experience the final memories of their Primarch Sanguinius in his last moments, reliving his death in combat against Horus with increasing intensity until they are consumed by it. These warriors aren't restrained. They are formed into assault units and deployed against the most dangerous objectives the battle company faces, given the chance to die for something before they are lost entirely. The Death Company chaplain leads them. He is described canonically as the light of the angel himself, a guiding illumination those brothers lost to the Black Rage can follow into glory and death. He is a beacon of sanity, the eye of a bloody storm, directing the irresistible towards something worthy of it. Simple zealotry doesn't qualify a chaplain for this role. Canonical descriptions of the position are explicit. Rage and hatred are useful tools, but they are nothing without control. The Death Company chaplain's function is more complex than inciting his brothers to greater heights of violence. He is the last thing that makes their violence meaningful. That isn't execution. It's the inverse of execution, preserving the meaning of a death that can't be prevented. The chaplain can't save those brothers. He can make their end matter. He does. The Dark Angels have formalized a more direct version of this authority in a specific variant, the Interrogator Chaplain, who holds explicit canonical authority to interrogate captured fallen, members of the original Dark Angels Legion who turned traitor during the Horus Heresy, hunted across the galaxy by the chapter's inner circle for 10,000 years, and to execute them after they repent. That authority is chapter-specific and target-specific. It reveals what the chaplain role contains at its most extreme formal expression. The spiritual shepherd is also the judge, and the judge's judgment can end a life. The Imperium assigned both functions to the same individual and filed the tension under necessary. Two chains of authority in a chapter: the captain's chain, which moves upward through the companies; the chaplain's chain, which runs from every company directly to the Master of Sanctity, and from there to the chapter master. A captain commands his company's operations. A chaplain commands and assesses his company's souls. Both chains are real. Both reach the top. The librarian runs a hierarchy entirely parallel to the company's structure, with 4 distinct ranks from entry to command. At the bottom, Lexicanium, the entry rank. A Lexicanium's primary documented duty is creating battle reports for the chapter's historical archive, summarizing campaigns, recording the great deeds and notable deaths, building the institutional memory that will outlast the individuals involved. This is, somewhat unexpectedly, why the role carries the name it does. The first librarians were named for record-keeping because they were the keepers of their legion's storehouses of knowledge and history, and the title survived the function, becoming secondary to psychic warfare by several millennia. Above the Lexicanium, the Codicere, who evaluates those battle reports and provides strategic overviews of campaigns. The Codicier's psychic abilities are developed enough for combat deployment. Then the Epistolary, the senior battlefield psychers, the chapter's most potent, combat-ready psionic assets. At the top, the chief librarian, one of the masters of the chapter, leading the librarius and commanding its assets. There is also an acolytum stage that precedes formal Lexicanium induction, the screening and initial evaluation phase before a recruit is fully brought into the librarius. From acolytum upward, 5 distinct positions, each with its own documented responsibilities. The librarius isn't a single rank, it's an internal bureaucracy within the chapter's parallel specialist structure. The screening is conducted by the existing librarians themselves. Every potential recruit to a chapter is assessed for psychic ability during the standard selection process. Those who show psychic sensitivity are subjected to invasive mental evaluation, testing their ability to withstand direct mental bombardment while simultaneously assessing their strength of will and their vulnerability to warp influence. The attrition rate among psychically gifted candidates is described as worse than among standard recruits. An aspirant who survives normal Astartes training has endured something extraordinary. An aspirant who survives normal Astartes training and the Librarium's psychic vetting has endured something significantly worse. If even a single librarian emerges from 1,000 potential candidates, canonical sources call it a boon to the chapter's strength. Most chapters have roughly a dozen librarians at any given time. The specific number varies considerably. What a qualified librarian can do that a standard battle brother can't is substantial enough to justify that cost. Telekinetic force projection, crackling bolts of lightning, psychic barriers, mind reading, astro-telepathic communication across interstellar distances, the mechanism by which Space Marine companies on campaign maintain contact with their fortress monasteries at all. Some documented librarians step briefly outside normal temporal flow, perceiving and acting marginally ahead of enemies. Force weapons, bladed or blunt melee arms that most warriors can't use to full effect, become lethal implements in the hands of a librarian who channels psychic energy directly through them. Senior epistolaries aren't unit enhancements. They are force multipliers that change what a battle company can accomplish in a single engagement. The problem is inseparable from the capability. Every Psyker's mind holds a link to the warp, the same dimension that chaos inhabits, that its gods weaponize, that its demons hunt through continuously, seeking any point of access into real space. Every time a librarian uses his abilities, he opens that link. His training reinforces his mental defenses throughout his entire career. But defenses built by human minds, even transhuman Astartes minds, aren't absolute against forces that have been probing them since before recorded history. A moment's weakness can unleash untold evils. If a demon gains access through a Psyker's failing mind, the immediate consequences can cascade well past the individual. A single possession event carries the documented potential to tear a rift in reality and cause a demonic incursion sufficient to threaten entire sectors. A librarian who falls to chaos doesn't just die, he converts. Everything invested in his transformation, the 19 organ implants, the psychic screening, the years of librarium training, the decades of accumulated battlefield experience, converts into an enemy asset. The losses, when they occur, don't scale linearly with a librarian's individual value. They scale with how much access to the warp his mind provides and how many of his brothers are nearby when that access opens. Some chapters respond to this problem by eliminating it completely. The Black Templars have no librarians. A Templar who manifests psychic ability does not become a battle psyker. The chapter's answer to the Chaos Vector problem is to not have the vector. The Marines Malevolent take a similar position. Both chapters are described in canonical sources as maintaining a healthy distrust of Psykers and all those who deal with the Immaterium. The Space Wolves take a different approach, and they take it loudly. Their Psykers are called Rune Priests rather than Librarians, and the Space Wolves maintain, with a certainty that characterizes that chapter in most disputes, that Rune Priests draw their power from the animistic spirits of Fenris, not from direct warp channeling. Theologically, this distinction matters enormously to the Space Wolves. Practically, Rune Priests produce the same battlefield results as epistolaries from any other chapter. The White Scars call their equivalent the Stormseer. The Silver Skulls call theirs prognosticators and won't commit to a battle without one taking auguries first, treating the reading as an expression of the Emperor's divine will. The Dark Angels Librarians carry an additional duty beyond standard Psyker functions. They also watch over the dungeons of the Rock and aid their chapter's interrogator chaplains in extracting confessions from the fallen by reducing the captive's mental barriers and separating truth from the web of lies. Every chapter's Psykers serve the chapter's specific institutional needs. The Librarius exists as a parallel structure precisely because those needs aren't uniform. The Edict of Nicaea, issued in 001M31, banned all librarians and ordered the closure of every legion's librarius. The ban was never formally rescinded by any specific decree. What happened instead? The Horus Heresy demonstrated that the forces of chaos couldn't be defeated without sanctioned psychic power on the imperial side. By the campaigns of the Great Scouring that followed, the ban was functionally reversed. The Imperium outlawed something because it was too dangerous. Then something more dangerous arrived. By the 41st millennium, each chapter decides independently whether to maintain a librarius. This pattern, outlaw the tool, need the tool, quietly rehabilitate the tool without issuing a formal retraction, is consistent Imperium behavior across 10,000 years. The Apothecary. Every chapter's Apothecarion is headed by the chief apothecary, also styled Master of the Apothecarion or Apothecary General. The standard arrangement places at least one apothecary with each company. Additional apothecaries staff the Apothecarion itself, the sprawling complex of sealed chambers within the fortress monastery where the chapter's entire genetic heritage is stored and maintained. These senior apothecaries rarely deploy to the field. Their work is different. Deep frozen catacombs connected to the Apothecarion house thousands of sealed flasks, each holding an extracted progenoid gland or other Astartes biological material. From this store, the apothecaries create new generations of space marines. They test gene seed samples through lengthy stress trials, subjecting each one to varying levels of radiation and chemical agents to assess stability. A flaw too small to notice can grow into catastrophic mutation across subsequent generations if it escapes detection. The genetic information carried in gene seed ultimately derives from the Emperor's own genome. The apothecarion's job is to ensure that link remains intact. If it finds a flaw and reports it, the chapter comes under scrutiny. If it doesn't find a flaw and the mutation spreads, the chapter risks extinction, chaos corruption, or excommunication from the Imperium in extreme cases. The stakes of an apothecary's failed genetic audit aren't confined to a single generation. An apothecary also oversees every step of the creation of a new space marine, not just the initial implantation, but the ongoing monitoring of each neophyte as his organs develop, assessing whether the implants are integrating correctly, whether mutation is emerging, whether any member of the squad is beginning to show the kind of biological irregularity that signals a deeper problem in the gene seed line. Every space marine who walks out of the scout company did so because an apothecary cleared him. The apothecary is the factory floor of space marine production. Every brother in a chapter's battle rolls passed through the apothecarion's hands before he ever fired a bolt. On the battlefield, an apothecary carries the narthecium, a gauntlet module or armature-mounted device containing the full toolkit of his specialty. It dispenses antivenoms, healing agents, and stim packs. It contains surgical equipment, cauterizing, stitching, removing shrapnel. It injects chemicals keyed to the Laraman's organ, triggering emergency clotting that seals even deep wounds under a layer of coagulated scar tissue. It can administer combat stimulants to a space marine who can't be evacuated, letting him fight for whatever time remains while bleeding internally from wounds that would have killed him otherwise. Even severely injured space marines can return to action within moments with narthecium support. And when a space marine is dying beyond any possibility of saving, the narthecium contains a spring-loaded piston of metal, a solid, purpose-built device called the carnifex, applied to the warrior's temple and driven through the brain. Quick, almost painless. The Emperor's Peace, the official designation. A mercy that the apothecary administers when there is nothing else left to administer. Then the apothecary keeps working. Built into the narthecium is the reductor, a carbon alloy extraction tool with a monomolecular saw for penetrating power armor and bone, and a diamantine-tipped extractor drill. The reductor extracts progenoid glands, the gene seed organs that mature in a space marine's body and contain the genetic material required to create new warriors. Every Astartes carries two. An apothecary walking among the dead after a battle punches the reductor into each fallen brother and extracts them. Chapter teachings frame this directly. While his gene seed returns to the chapter, a battle brother can't die. The biological logic underneath the spiritual formulation. A space marine chapter that loses its gene seed can't replace its losses. Bereft of viable progenoid glands, a chapter withers within a generation. The genetic line ends. The body is a vessel. The gene seed is the continuation. What the apothecary carries off the battlefield determines whether the chapter has a future. The Primaris Apothecary carries a reductor pistol, an enhanced version of the reductor tool, built as a standalone sidearm, capable of storing multiple extractions simultaneously, designed to be used in active combat. You don't build a dedicated ranged version of a gene seed extraction tool unless gene seed extraction needs to happen in conditions where stopping to kneel over a body isn't possible. The tool tells the story. An apothecary who loses gene seed has failed his chapter in a way that outlasts any single battle. When Space Marines fight Tyranids, this calculus becomes explicit. Tyranids consume biological matter and incorporate it into their own genetics. A fallen Space Marine's gene seed absorbed by a Tyranid organism isn't merely lost. It becomes part of something the Imperium will eventually face in battle again. The Apothecarion treats this as the worst possible outcome. Not the death of the warrior, but the consumption of his genetic legacy. Apothecaries have fought through hordes of Tyranids to recover fallen brothers. In extreme cases, an apothecary will destroy himself rather than allow extracted gene seed to be taken. The logic is the same as the Carnifex. The mercy of a certain ending is preferable to the horror of a corrupted continuation. Apothecaries who serve the Death Watch, the chamber militant of the Ordo Xenos, carry this responsibility further than any other. A Death Watch apothecary must master the genetic inheritance not only of his own chapter's gene seed, but of every chapter represented in his kill team, monitoring and maintaining implants for warriors drawn from potentially a dozen different bloodlines simultaneously. Space Marine chapters don't lightly share the details of their gene seed, with its associated traits, variations, and mutations. The Death Watch apothecary is sworn to maintain those secrets, and the oath carries penalties the sources decline to specify, which typically means the penalties are severe. Chapter variations affect the role at its edges. Iron Hands apothecaries work so closely with techmarines on bionic implantation and maintenance that the roles blur. White Scars apothecaries perform battlefield surgery in the transport bay of a moving rhino, because the hunt doesn't stop for casualties. The Mortifactors spend nearly as much time claiming macabre relics from fallen brothers as treating the living. The investment required beyond standard Astartes transformation, full medical and biological specialization, training in cybernetic implantation, expertise in the genetics of their specific chapter's gene seed line. Whether apothecaries begin as standard line Space Marines who then specialize, or begin their careers as medics from the start, is one of those canonical questions the sources decline to answer definitively. The Helix Adept, apothecaries attached to vanguard formations wearing Phobos armor, using the Helix Gauntlet, appears to represent a potential early stage of inclusion in the Apothecarion. The Apothecary Biologist is a Primaris variant operating in Gravis armor who applies knowledge of healing in reverse, researching enemies to develop poisons and biological countermeasures. Newer formations, newer designations. The function doesn't change. The Apothecarion's job is the chapter's biology, start to finish, from first implant to final harvest. The grimdark irony here doesn't require exaggeration. The apothecary is a Space Marine who also trained as a surgeon and a geneticist, who walks through battles keeping his brothers alive, who carries on his wrist a tool purpose-built to drill into the bodies of those brothers after they die, and whose most important job, the mission that the chapter's survival depends on, begins the moment that keeping them alive was no longer possible. The better the apothecary, the more efficiently he processes the loss of the warriors he just failed to save. The efficiency isn't callousness, it's the specific professional discipline the role requires. Here is the rank that everyone in this comment section forgot they were forgetting: the Sergeant. The Codex Astartes mandates that every Space Marine squad is to be led by a sergeant. Not most squads, not squads operating in specific tactical roles. Every squad. A sergeant is a veteran of hundreds of battles who leads with icy calm through the most dangerous scenarios, makes difficult decisions based on instinct, and the Codex is explicit that only a few Space Marines have the required level of ability to take on this role. Across a 1,000-warrior chapter organized into squads of 10, that still produces something approaching 100 sergeants just for the chapter to function at full strength. By sheer numbers, this is the most common officer rank in the Astartes by a significant margin. It's also the rank least likely to appear in a video about special roles. The qualification isn't an exotic gift, a Mars pilgrimage, or a specific biological feature. It's survival and demonstrated judgment. A warrior proves himself capable of holding his nerve through enough campaigns, makes enough correct instinctive calls in the field, and receives the red helmet, the Codex's standard rank marking. Scout sergeants occupy a particular position within this tier worth noting separately. A scout sergeant both teaches and leads squads of Space Marine scouts, and by passing on their skills and experience to future battle brothers, they are arguably among the most influential members of a chapter in a long-term structural sense. In addition to teaching combat, a scout sergeant is responsible for keeping discipline and monitoring the scout's psychological and biological conditioning in the field, where the squad may be operating away from chaplains and apothecaries. The scout sergeant is doing 3 jobs simultaneously: tactical leader, instructor, and welfare monitor. He is an apothecary and chaplain substitute at the scout company level, with none of those designations and none of their formal recognition. The veteran sergeant has earned the Crux Terminatus and may be transferred to a command squad or to the first company, the chapter's elite veteran formation. A white stripe on the red helmet marks the distinction. A veteran sergeant who performs a sufficiently heroic act may be promoted to wear Terminator armor. A very great deed may see him replace a deceased captain directly. The path upward exists. Most warriors who become sergeants remain sergeants, and the chapter needs them to. Chapter variants give the role different names. The Space Wolves call their equivalent a pack leader. The Dark Angels use Knight Sergeant or Sergeant at Arms. The Celestial Lions use Pride Leader. The Death Watch use Watch Sergeant. The Excoriators use Squad Whip, a designation that communicates its own command philosophy in 2 words. The sergeant is invisible in specialist discussions because its origin story is just experience. No Mars pilgrimage, no psychic screening, no dedicated ceremonial role. The Codex says every squad gets one because every squad needs one, which makes sergeants too foundational to register as a specialized tier worth explaining. They aren't noteworthy enough to generate content about. They are too essential to omit from any functioning chapter. The Honor Guard generated more comment section debate than any other rank in this video, specifically over hierarchy placement. The phrase that kept appearing was "between captains and chapter masters," multiple reply threads. The canonical answer requires dissolving the frame the question assumes. The Honor Guard is the personal retinue, bodyguard, and command squad of the chapter master. Membership is drawn from the chapter's most experienced veterans, warriors who have performed deeds of such exceptional valor that they've received the highest honors a chapter can bestow. Their accumulated experience and understanding of warfare commonly surpasses even that of the chapter's captains. They carry war gear drawn from among the most ancient and venerated relics of the chapter, ornate suits of artificer armor dating from the chapter's earliest days, master-crafted Astartes weapons that have seen battle in the hands of 1,000 great heroes across the centuries. A perfect weapon wedded to a perfect warrior. The combination produces a force that only the boldest or most terrifying foes can hope to stand against. Do they outrank captains? They don't. They don't have to. A captain commands a company. An Honor Guard member is directly attached to the person every captain reports to, has been attached to that person for years or decades, and is understood by the entire chapter to carry the chapter master's trust in a way that formal company command rank doesn't replicate. Canonical sources note that it is considered folly for even the master of the chapter, a noble and peerless warrior of several centuries standing, to ignore the solemn counsel of his honor guard. The honor guard rarely gives unsolicited advice, for to do so risks undermining their commander's authority. That restraint only increases the weight of their words when they do speak. The "between captains and chapter master" framing in the comment section was trying to map this onto the standard command hierarchy, which is the wrong frame. The honor guard sits beside the chapter command tier, rather than within the company command structure. Their authority isn't a rank that supersedes company command. It's a relationship the chapter master extends, and its weight derives from that relationship's history and demonstrated trust. Within the honor guard itself, two specialist roles carry specific functions. The chapter champion is charged with defending the life of the chapter master and upholding the honor of the chapter, specifically challenging enemy warlords and champions to single combat, leaving the chapter master free to conduct the wider battle rather than engaging in a series of personal fights. A chapter champion who has fought the most terrifying opponents the galaxy produces back-to-back across decades develops a relationship with his chapter master that makes him advisor and confidant as much as bodyguard. The chapter standard bearer is a veteran space marine hand-picked by either the chapter master or the reclusiarch for stubbornness and resilience, a specific psychological profile that makes him suitable for holding the chapter's most sacred relic aloft in battle, regardless of what is happening around him. Standard bearers have held their ground against enemies that killed everyone else around them and refused to die before the banner fell. The legends exist in every chapter that maintains an honor guard. That is the functional definition of the honor guard. They die last, so the chapter master doesn't. The Ultramarines maintain two distinct formations in this space: the Standard Honor Guard and the Victrix Honor Guard, established during the Indomitus Crusade as an even more exclusive formation composed of veterans drawn from both the Ultramarines and their successor chapters, an expanded recruitment pool that draws on the wider Ultramarines gene line rather than solely the parent chapter. Two tiers. Even within Honor Guard, there are gradations. The Space Wolves equivalent is the Wolf Guard, the most elite veterans of each great company, hand-selected by their Wolf Lord for exceptional deeds rather than age or time served. Ragnar Blackmane, the youngest Space Wolf ever promoted to Wolf Lord, entered the Wolf Guard directly from the Bloodclaws after killing an Orc warlord named Borzag Khan in close combat, and then systematically dispatching the warlord's entire retinue of knobs afterward. One engagement. One act sufficiently exceptional to mark a warrior as Wolf Guard material. Arjak Rockfist, known as Grimnar's champion and the Anvil of Fenris, was made the Great Wolf, Logan Grimnar's personal champion, before he was even formally inducted as a Space Marine. His strength and fortitude so impressed Grimnar during his mortal warrior period that the role was held for him. Entry to the Honor Guard has no standard test and no training course. It's a career you survive, noticed by the right person. The techmarine is the compounding cost argument at its most extreme. In the chapter hierarchy, techmarines belong to the Armoury, outside the company-level organization, alongside the chapter's vehicles and weapon systems. The Master of the Forge commands the entire techmarine corps. In standard Codex-compliant chapters, techmarines hold minimal command authority. They maintain and operate the chapter's arsenal. They aren't expected to lead. Before any of that, there is Mars. An aspiring techmarine is already a fully transformed space marine. All 19 implants, Scout Company completed, Battle Brother inducted, when the chapter identifies him as having the aptitude and disposition for Mechanicus technical disciplines. He is then sent to Mars for an apprenticeship with the Adeptus Mechanicus. The canonical duration, up to 30 standard years. During those 30 years, he learns the rites of activation and hymnals of maintenance. the sacred rituals by which Mechanicus priests believe they communicate with and appease the machine spirits inhabiting complex technology. He learns how to call forth a machine spirit or placate its wrath. He studies the theology of the omnissiah, the machine god of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and absorbs it as theology rather than operating procedure. The Mechanicus does not distinguish between those two categories. The prayers are the procedures. The rituals are the maintenance protocols. A techmarine who learns to maintain a plasma drive is also, simultaneously, learning the correct devotional sequence for a plasma drive, and there is no version of the training that separates these things. 30 years. The chapter he left as a full battle brother has continued fighting without him, has recruited new aspirants and run them through the transformation process, has promoted sergeants and buried captains, has potentially engaged in campaigns that will become foundational chapter history. History this techmarine will have to learn secondhand when he returns. The chapter has fought, grieved, recovered, and fought again in the time he spent learning sacred machine prayers on a red desert planet. He comes back to a chapter that has lived a generation of warfare without him. He also comes back as something the chapter can't fully classify. The canonical description is explicit, pledged by blood to their chapter, but bound in mind and spirit to the mysteries of the cult Mechanicus's omnissiah. The dual loyalty isn't a fan inference. It's documented as an acknowledged fact within the setting, and the suspicion it engenders is described directly in canonical sources. The esteem is also real, because without this warrior, the vehicles break down, the thunderfire cannons go silent, the armor stops being repaired to combat-ready standard, and the chapter begins losing capability that can't be replaced. A techmarine who knows he is viewed with ambient suspicion increasingly retreats to the chapter's forges, limiting contact with his battle brothers to the minimum required by his function. This withdrawal pattern is documented as a common outcome, not a pathological exception. The servo harness is the multi-limbed mechanical apparatus that marks a techmarine in the field. Multiple articulated arms extending from the backpack unit, each capable of independent operation while the warrior fights with his own hands. Battlefield repair of vehicles and armor becomes possible without stopping combat operations. The Thunderfire Cannon, a heavy artillery piece capable of targeting almost anywhere on a battlefield and significantly disrupting enemy infantry movement, requires a techmarine to operate. The knowledge to keep a chapter's equipment functional isn't transferable through standard training. It requires the Mars apprenticeship to exist at all. The suspicious thing about a techmarine isn't that he left, it's that he came back, and you can't quite tell who he came back as. The Iron Hands built a different answer to the techmarine's structural isolation. Their Iron Father is a single specialist who combines the chaplain and techmarine roles, both spiritual stewardship of the chapter and technical mastery of its equipment, held by one warrior. The origin is documented. When Ferrus Manus took command of the Iron Hands Legion, he assimilated a pre-existing order of engineer mystics from the planet Medusa, warriors who had maintained Dark Age of technology machinery through theological ritual, and the role they represented became the Iron Father. Iron Fathers serve on the Great Clan Council, the Iron Hands governing body, with explicit command authority, not kept at arm's length from command, not assigned to the Armoury and politely excluded from governance, a council seat, a formal voice in how the chapter operates. The Iron Hands looked at a role that most chapters treat as necessary but socially marginal, and concluded that if a warrior carries both a chaplain's spiritual authority and a techmarine's technical expertise, he should have the command standing to act on both. Every other chapter draws those two lines as parallel but separate. The Iron Hands merged them and gave the result governing power. The Salamander's relationship with the Forge culture shows at the edges of specialist design rather than in structural reorganization. Their chaplains carry Crozius Arcanum, fashioned as a smith's hammer or a dragon's head, rather than the standard imperial aquila, a deviation that maps onto the chapter's deep investment in master crafting weapons and armor for individual battle brothers. The salamanders treat craftsmanship as a spiritual practice, and the Crozius designs reflect that the boundary between the chaplain's cultural authority and the smith's technical reverence is thinner in that chapter than the Codex formally proposes it should be. The cost of a techmarine. Full Astartes transformation, then up to 30 years of Mars apprenticeship, then return with a divided institutional loyalty that the chapter acknowledges while being unable to fully resolve. The most expensive specialist in the chapter is the one the chapter owns least completely. The rank the commenter named first in the opening comment, the one that launched this entire video, is the lieutenant. And the reason their absence from the original 7-level framework wasn't simply an oversight is worth understanding clearly. The lieutenant rank has origins in the Space Marine legions of the Great Crusade. In that era, the vast scale of the legions and their complex multi-company operations created genuine need for sub-company leadership tiers. The lieutenant existed in some form. When Guilliman wrote the original Codex Astartes following the Horus Heresy, the reorganization reduced legions to 1,000-warrior chapters, and the organizational challenges shrank correspondingly. The standard company command structure settled into captain plus sergeants, a captain commanding 10 squads, each led by a sergeant with no formally defined sub-company officer between them. That structure persisted for most of the game's history and most of the in-universe millennium. It's not absent from the older codex because Guilliman forgot. The span of control works for Space Marines in a way it wouldn't for unaugmented troops, and the original codex treated it as sufficient. In 2017, the 8th edition of Warhammer 40,000 launched with the Primaris Space Marines and Guilliman's revised Codex Astartes. Canonical sources call it the Novo Codex Astartes. The revised codex formally reintroduced 2 lieutenants per company, each commanding a demi-company of 50 warriors. The company splits into 2 formations, each under a lieutenant, with the captain coordinating the whole. Chain of command: chapter master, captain, lieutenant, sergeant, battle brother. The Dark Imperium starter set that launched 8th edition came with 2 Primaris lieutenants built into its Space Marine force, the first physical representations of the reformalized rank available in the modern game, 2 per company. Sub-unit command, not running the company, but running half of it with enough authority to make tactical decisions within that formation without waiting for the captain's attention. The lieutenant's return as a formalized rank demonstrates something the prior video's framework couldn't show by design. The hierarchy isn't fixed. Guilliman himself, having returned in late M41 and assessed the state of the Adeptus Astartes across the galaxy, found the structure wanting and changed it. He added 2 officers per company. He redefined squad types and roles. He introduced formations the original codex hadn't anticipated. The 7-level framework was accurate to a version of the hierarchy that has since been revised by the man who wrote it, who is still alive in the setting and actively revising it further. The Codex Astartes does not exist as a single canonical text. The original no longer exists in any form, and the earliest surviving copy is called the Apocrypha of Scaros. Competing versions have accumulated over millennia. In some cases, these versions are so divergent that chapters have gone to war over differing interpretations. A document that has gone to war with itself isn't a fixed hierarchy. It's a living argument. The cost of a lieutenant: full Astartes transformation, then demonstrated operational command ability at a level that convinces a captain to trust them with half his force. No exotic training, no specialist gift. The second bill is competence and the captain's confidence in it. 7 roles, 7 gaps the audience independently identified. Across all of them, the same structure holds. The Codex Astartes places the Chaplaincy, the Librarium, the Apothecarion, and the Armoury explicitly outside the company-level organization, because these bodies were never designed as tiers in a progression. They are parallel systems. They run alongside the standard hierarchy, intersect with it at every rank, and serve needs the company structure can't address. A company captain can direct combat operations. He can't audit his own warrior's ideological soundness. He can't extract gene seed from fallen brothers under fire. He can't maintain the Thunderfire cannon or communicate through the warp to another star system. He can't bend telekinesis against a demon. The chaplain shapes a warrior's identity from neophyte induction onward, tests his spiritual soundness throughout his service, and at the extreme formal expression of his authority, leads doomed brothers toward worthy deaths when all that remains is how they are spent. The librarian gives the chapter its most powerful single battlefield asset and its most direct vector for catastrophic loss simultaneously, because the warp does not offer terms that avoid both outcomes at once. The apothecary maintains the biological continuity of everything the chapter has ever been, carrying on his wrist a tool designed to drill into the bodies of brothers he just failed to save, because the chapter's future runs through what he recovers from the dead. The sergeant is everywhere, mandatory per codex, carrying a red helmet that the codex designates as the rank marking for every squad leader across every compliant chapter. The honor guard doesn't outrank captains. It doesn't need to, because the chapter master's trust is more durable than any formal precedence grade. The techmarine comes back from 30 years on Mars carrying divided loyalty that his chapter acknowledges and can't resolve, and remains indispensable anyway. The lieutenant fills a command gap that apparently existed for 10,000 years before Guilliman returned, assessed his own structure, and corrected it. Each of them paid the standard entry fee first, 19 implants, the black carapace as the last and most significant, the neural interface that makes a warrior an Astartes rather than simply a heavily modified human. Then the second bill, the Mars apprenticeship, the ideological vetting that never ends, the lifetime of psychic training against an opponent that never sleeps, the medical specialization that begins where standard training ends, the career of accumulated judgment that produces a sergeant, the trajectory of proven excellence that earns the chapter master's notice, the operational competence that makes a captain trust you with half his force. The hierarchy was never 7 levels. It was never even 12. It was whatever the Imperium needed it to be, and every specialist paid the standard price just to earn the right to pay more. Subscribe for more of this kind of breakdown.